Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was a marvel of architectural arrogance. An endless cavern of floating obsidian platforms and shimmering light barriers that hummed with the oppressive weight of 1,000 star systems. It was a place designed to make any individual feel utterly insignificant, a monument to the absolute authority of the ruling empires. Today, however, the suffocating atmosphere was thick with a tense, murmuring dread. The highest echelons of the universe had gathered not for war or trade, but to witness a tragedy. High above the assembly, projected in a terrifyingly clear holographic display, was Princess Lyra. The daughter of the sovereign king was dying. She was not suffering from a physical wound, but from a devastating mental decay known as the Void Blight. It was a phantom disease, an unnatural storm raging within her consciousness, systematically dismantling her brilliant mind and leaving only a hollow shell. The Sovereign King stood at the apex of the chamber. His usually formidable presence was weighed down by immense sorrow. He amplified his voice across the vast expanse, his tone carrying the desperate edge of a father pushed to the very brink of sanity. "Hear me, representatives of the cosmos," he declared, his voice echoing against the cold stone. "My daughter's mind slips further into the abyss with every passing second. Medical science has failed. Technological intervention has failed. I offer this solemn vow to any entity capable of entering the mind bridge and purging this corruption from her consciousness. You shall receive 1/3 of the entire royal armada, and the princess's hand in marriage." A cold, cynical wave of murmurs washed over the alien delegates. The offer was astronomical, a prize that could elevate a minor planetary system to a galactic superpower overnight. Yet, no one stepped forward. Instead, cruel amusement flickered across the faces of the telepathic warlords and cybernetic overlords. They mocked the Sovereign King's desperate trial. The Void Blight was a known death sentence. Over the past 3 months, countless highly advanced artificial intelligences and deeply integrated hive minds had attempted to interface with the anomaly. Every single one had been violently crushed. The machine intelligences, capable of processing trillions of calculations per nanosecond, had their neural pathways fried into molten slag within moments of contact. The hive minds, boasting the combined willpower of billions of interconnected souls, were forced to violently sever their connections to prevent the psychic rot from spreading back to their homeworlds and infecting their entire populations. To attempt the mind bridge now was considered an act of sheer, illogical suicide. Then, the heavy silence was broken by the sound of heavy boots on the pristine obsidian floor. A figure detached himself from the obscure, dimly lit section reserved for the lowest tier of diplomats. It was Alan Albert. He was an Earth diplomat and a former combat medic, a man who had seen the gruesome reality of terrestrial warfare firsthand during the brutal resource conflicts of the 22nd century. He wore a simple, unadorned charcoal uniform that looked painfully dull against the radiant, bioluminescent silks, glowing hard light shields, and intricate metallic armor of the other delegates. His presence alone was considered an insult by many of the high-born species present. Without hesitation, he walked right into the center of the Great Hall, stopping directly beneath the holographic projection of the dying princess. "I will enter the mind bridge," Alan stated. His voice was calm, devoid of any grandiosity, but it cut through the murmurs with absolute clarity. For a brief moment, the Great Hall was dead silent. Then, an eruption of wild, deafening laughter shook the chamber. It was a cacophony of clicking mandibles, synthesized sneers, and booming, telepathic scoffs. The alien empires found the situation incredibly hilarious. A cosmic joke delivered at the worst possible time. To them, humans were nothing more than primitive, mud-crawling beasts who had barely managed to harness basic fusion technology. They possessed weak, fragile organic brains that were completely isolated from the great cosmic network. They were blind, deaf, and dumb to the psychic currents of the universe. How could a creature with no neural implants, no quantum processing capabilities, and no collective consciousness even comprehend the abstract, multidimensional nature of the void blight, let alone cure a disease that had slaughtered gods of silicon and light? A towering, crystalline entity from the Alpha Centauri sector leaned forward, its voice dripping with venomous condescension. "A human! Your wet, spongy brain will boil the moment you establish the uplink. Go back to your dirt rock, little primate. This is a task for higher beings." Alan completely ignored the barrage of telepathic insults and vocalized mockery. His expression remained utterly unreadable. A stoic mask forged in the muddy trenches and blood-soaked medical tents of Earth's most brutal conflicts. He did not power up a personal shielding device. He did not synchronize a quantum computer array or call upon a secondary artificial intelligence for support. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his only tool for this impossible task. It was an old, frayed paper physics notebook. The edges of the pages were yellowed and heavily curled, the leather cover stained and worn from decades of continuous use. He held it with a quiet, grounding reverence. The wild laughter in the hall abruptly died down, replaced by a profound, highly uncomfortable confusion. The superior races stared intensely at the archaic object, their optical sensors zooming in to analyze the strange artifact. They could not compute the logic of the situation at all. Why would a primitive creature bring bound, dead tree matter covered in graphite scribbles to a digital psychic battlefield? The sheer absurdity of the gesture left the galactic elites utterly bewildered. They watched in stunned silence as Alan simply stood there, clutching his little paper book, waiting calmly for the Sovereign King to grant him access to the Chamber of Death. The transition to the royal mausoleum plunged the observers into an atmosphere of chilling finality. Located deep beneath the planetary crust, the vast circular chamber was built from sound-absorbing stone and illuminated only by the sterile, pulsating light of the stasis pod at its center. Inside the thick, transparent casing lay Princess Lyra. Her physical form remained perfectly preserved. Yet the reality around the pod was violently distorting. Invisible shockwaves of telepathic force continuously slammed against the containment field, creating audible cracking sounds. These waves were not standard psychic emissions, but absolute anti-logic fields, capable of shredding any coherent thought pattern that dared to enter their radius. Despite the horrifying display of the infection's potency, two titans of the galactic community refused to step down. They moved toward the pod, representing the absolute pinnacle of their respective evolutionary paths. The first was the Apex construct, a monolithic supercomputer from the deep core systems. It was a towering, floating obelisk of shifting dark matter, housing a processing core that dwarfed the combined intelligence of 1,000 lesser worlds. Beside it floated a representative of the luminous harmony, an entity composed entirely of shifting, prismatic light. It was the physical manifestation of a massive collective consciousness, possessing the synchronized mental power of billions of interconnected beings spread across 20 different star systems. The Apex construct initiated its attempt first. It fired a concentrated, blindingly bright beam of pure data straight through the stasis glass, directly interfacing with the princess's mind. The machine's strategy was absolute mathematical dominance. It sought to calculate the parameters of the anomaly, quarantine the corrupted sectors, and run a systemic deletion protocol. For precisely 4 seconds, the towering obelisk thrummed with a victorious sapphire light, processing trillions of countermeasures per microsecond. Then, the anomaly struck back. The infection did not fight with numbers. It fought with paradoxes. It flooded the supercomputer with illogical equations, forcing the machine to calculate scenarios where true meant false and existence equaled non-existence. The construct's rigid programming could not adapt to pure chaos. The sapphire light violently shifted to a warning crimson. Sirens wailed as the cooling systems failed instantly, with a catastrophic, deafening blast. The central core of the Apex construct detonated. Shards of hyper-dense alloy and burning memory drives rained down across the polished floor, leaving nothing but a smoking crater where the pinnacle of artificial intelligence had hovered just moments before, completely unfazed by the violent destruction of its synthetic counterpart. The entity of the luminous harmony drifted forward. Its approach was entirely different. It did not try to solve the infection. It attempted to dilute it, extending thousands of ethereal tendrils of psychic light. The being connected to the host. Its goal was to absorb the chaotic energy and disperse it safely across its vast network of billions of minds, turning a lethal dose into a harmless whisper. The moment the link was established, the room flared with a blinding holy radiance. However, the triumph lasted only 2 seconds. The infection was not a static poison. It was a predatory, self-replicating virus of the soul. Instead of absorbing the blight, the collective mind inadvertently offered itself as a banquet. The pristine white light of the tendrils suddenly turned a sickening, bruised purple. The corruption raced up the psychic connection, hungering for the billions of connected souls waiting on the other side. "Sever the connection immediately!" roared the chief overseer from the observation deck, panic lacing his booming voice. "Cut the link before the homeworlds fall!" Searing blades of plasma dropped from the ceiling, violently slashing through the psychic tethers, the light being collapsed to the ground. Writhing and screaming in agony as a massive portion of its own collective essence was permanently amputated to save its species from total annihilation. Alan stood near the observation barrier, watching the debris settle. His expression remained incredibly calm, almost analytical, while the alien dignitaries trembled in terror, speaking in hushed voices about the invincible nature of the disease. Alan viewed the tragedy from a vastly different perspective. He did not see a failure of advanced technology or a lack of collective processing power. Drawing on his extensive background as a combat medic dealing with rampant biological warfare on his home planet, he saw a fundamental failure of immune response. The Apex construct had attempted to fight a mutating pathogen with strict, inflexible rules. The luminous harmony had attempted to passively absorb a predator without erecting a defense. They possessed only 2 modes: absolute domination or total assimilation. Neither of these supreme beings understood the concept of adaptation. They did not know how to mutate, how to endure a fever, or how to develop antibodies. Without a word, Alan stepped forward. His worn boots crushed the smoldering remnants of the supercomputer as he approached the connection chair. Immediately, a swarm of automated medical drones rushed out to meet him, offering an array of protective equipment. They held out neural shock absorbers, synaptic regulators, and heavy synthetic barrier helmets meant to dampen the inevitable psychic trauma. "No, thank you," Alan said firmly, pushing the hovering machines aside with his bare hands. He completely refused every single piece of advanced dampening gear. He intended to walk into the storm using nothing but his raw, unshielded organic brain. A collective gasp of absolute horror rippled through the viewing galleries. The earlier mockery had entirely vanished, replaced by a morbid, breathless fascination. The supreme beings of the galaxy leaned forward, their visual receptors locked on the fragile human. They were fully convinced they were about to witness the spectacular, messy rupture of a primitive skull. Eager to see the gruesome biological limitations of the species they so deeply despised, Alan calmly sat down in the primary interface chair, clutching his old, frayed paper notebook tightly to his chest, and gave the technicians a single, subtle nod to drop him into the abyss. The moment the neural interface engaged, there was no blinding flash of light, no sterile loading screen, and no organized grid of digital data. Alan felt his physical body dissolve into a terrifying, visceral sensation of endless free fall. The physical sensation of the interface chair fading away was replaced by a sudden, violent tearing of his sensory inputs. He was no longer a body of flesh and blood. He was pure perception thrown entirely into the abyss. The air in his lungs vanished, replaced by the bitter taste of metallic ozone and the heavy scent of old dust. When his perception finally stabilized, he found himself standing not on a digital platform, but on the crumbling edge of a sprawling, desolate metropolis, suspended in absolute zero gravity. This was the shattered architecture of Princess Lyra's subconscious mind. It was a realm of profound, haunting beauty, completely ravaged by a psychological disaster. Buildings that defied the laws of physics stretched endlessly in every direction, their foundations ripped from the ground and left to drift like dead ships in an ocean of nothingness. Towering spires of luminescent crystal, which clearly represented her highest intellect and most cherished memories, had been violently sheared in half. Entire city blocks of cobblestone and marble floated upside down, slowly colliding in the soundless void and breaking into millions of glittering fragments. There was no sky above him, only a vast, suffocating expanse of bruised purple and deep crimson nebulae. It was a deeply surreal painting of devastation, a brilliant mind rendered into a chaotic debris field where up and down simply did not exist, and where the atmosphere tasted constantly of sorrow and forgotten centuries. Lurking ominously within the ruins of this shattered city was the entity known as the Void Blight. It did not possess a biological body, nor was it a simple string of malicious digital code. It manifested as a colossal, sentient storm system of churning gray ash and crackling, pitch-black lightning. As Alan drifted carefully from one floating piece of masonry to another, he observed the storm's terrifying hunting pattern. Within the swirling vortex of the storm, Alan could vaguely hear the endless, agonizing screams of the artificial intelligences and the fractured hive minds that had previously perished here, their digitized souls trapped in an endless loop of destruction. The storm was inexplicably drawn to symmetry and perfection. Whenever two floating fragments of the city accidentally aligned into a perfect geometric shape, or whenever a coherent thought formed a straight, logical path in the ruins, the storm would lash out with terrifying speed, completely consuming the structured matter. This was the fatal trap that had doomed the previous challengers. The infection fed voraciously on absolute order and flawless logic. The disease was a mirror that reflected perfection back upon itself until it shattered. By trying to outsmart the storm, the galaxy's greatest minds had simply handed the executioner a sharper blade. The supercomputer and the collective hive mind had essentially offered the pathogen an infinite, perfectly structured banquet, gorging the disease until it violently erupted and destroyed them. Alan immediately understood that to fight a predator that devours reason, he had to starve it with absolute madness. As the black storm sensed his foreign presence and violently turned its churning mass toward him, Alan did not attempt to build a mental fortress of logical defenses. Instead, he weaponized the unique, chaotic nature of human cognition. He tapped deep into his organic brain's capacity for cognitive dissonance and unbound, irrational imagination. He began projecting concepts that were fundamentally impossible into the psychic space around him. It was a tactical deployment of human madness. He vividly visualized a square circle, a heavy silence that could shatter glass, and a frozen river that flowed rapidly upward into a burning ocean. He imagined a vibrant color that tasted exclusively of ancient rust, and an endless staircase that constantly went downward, but somehow led directly to the top of a mountain. He flooded the void with the physical taste of the color purple, the heavy weight of a spoken whisper, and the blinding brightness of total silence. The storm rushed at him, its jaws of anti-logic wide open to consume his defenses. But it violently crashed into a solid wall of pure, unadulterated human absurdity. The anomaly desperately tried to process the blatant contradictions, attempting to mathematically break down the irrational concepts. But there was absolutely nothing logical to consume. The dark lightning fizzled into harmless sparks, and the gray ash dissolved into heavy, meaningless rain. The predator was completely paralyzed, thrashing and convulsing, choking on a heavy diet of sheer nonsense produced by a mind letting its imagination run entirely without boundaries. While the massive storm thrashed in terrible confusion, Alan needed a way to navigate the shifting, unpredictable gravity of the ruined city, to prevent his own mind from dissolving into the surrounding surreal chaos. He manifested his frayed paper notebook. In this psychic realm, the book appeared in his hand exactly as weathered and worn as it was in reality. However, he did not use it to calculate trajectories or map a logical path. Instead, he opened it to the pages documenting his most agonizing, chaotic memories from the brutal battlefields of Earth. He focused entirely on the visceral, imperfect pain of losing his comrades, the suffocating smell of burnt soil, and the profound survivor's guilt that defied all rational explanation. He recalled a specific night in a medical tent, the overwhelming despair of pressing his hands against a mortal wound, the desperate prayers to a silent sky, and the profound, illogical will to keep fighting long after the battle was mathematically lost. He used his own deeply ingrained trauma as a heavy, unmovable anchor, by firmly grounding himself in the profound imperfection and raw suffering of his human existence. He became entirely immune to the storm's reality-altering waves. Human grief cannot be solved by a mathematical equation. The infection probed his thoughts, searching for a weak point of logic to exploit. But it found only the messy, unstructured, and incredibly resilient scar tissue of a human soul that refused to surrender to despair. Because the infection could not understand his pain, it simply slid right off him. Step by step, jumping bravely between the broken stones, he moved deeper into the core of the subconscious, at the very center of the devastated metropolis, completely isolated on a small floating island of cracked obsidian. Alan finally found the core consciousness of Princess Lyra. She manifested as a brilliant, shimmering entity of pure starlight. But she was curled into a tight, defensive sphere, weeping crystalline tears. She was not free to move. She was securely imprisoned inside a terrifyingly complex cage. The bars of the cage were not forged from iron or steel, but from raw, cold calculations. They were complex equations of inevitable biological decay, constantly generated by the pathogen, forcing her brilliant mind to endlessly process the exact mathematical probability of her own demise. Every single time she tried to think of a logical solution to escape, the cage immediately proved her failure, tightening its grip and draining her willpower. She was being brutally tortured to death by inescapable logic. "It equals 0, Lyra whispered, her voice a chorus of chiming bells echoing with profound sadness in the vast emptiness. "Every variable I introduce, every countermeasure I formulate, the equation always ends at 0. My existence equals 0. It is scientifically proven. I am already dead." Alan landed softly beside the oppressive structure, the sole of his combat boot making no sound on the obsidian rock. "You cannot outthink this trap," he said, his voice echoing warmly and firmly against the cold calculations. The more you calculate your escape, the stronger these bars become. Lyra looked up, her starlight form pulsing with desperate fear. Her highly evolved species operated in a state of constant, perfect lucidity. She simply did not know any other way to exist. Alan knelt beside the mathematical prison and placed his hands fearlessly near the glowing equations. You have to completely stop thinking, he instructed gently. You have to do something my people do every single night when the darkness gets too heavy. You have to dream. But what is a dream? Lyra asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. It is a beautiful lie your brain tells itself to heal, Alan replied, pressing his hands closer to the bars, pushing his own chaotic, subconscious energy through the gaps. It is a hidden sanctuary where gravity pulls upward, where the dead can speak to us, and where cold equations do not have to equal anything at all. He patiently showed her how to let go of absolute control, how to allow her advanced brain to misfire safely, creating a powerful illusion of fragmented stories where logic held absolutely no power. He taught her how to imagine a world that did not exist. As she finally closed her inner eyes, trusting the human beside her, and let go of objective reality, the cold, rigid bars of the logical cage began to melt away, rapidly replaced by the soft, illogical petals of a blooming, impossible flower, forging an impenetrable, chaotic shield against the storm outside. The chaotic storm began to lose its structural integrity, as the impossible flower bloomed outward from the core of Princess Lyra's consciousness. Its chaotic and illogical petals violently displaced the dark ash of the void blight. Alan pushed forward through the receding tempest. He did not walk with physical legs, but propelled his awareness through sheer willpower. The surreal and shattered metropolis slowly dissolved around them, peeling away like old paint to reveal the absolute bottom of the mental ocean. Here, hidden beneath thick layers of simulated destruction, lay the true heart of the infection. It was not a chaotic anomaly at all. It was a perfectly smooth and geometric black obelisk. It hovered quietly in the silent void, pulsating with a cold and malevolent light. Alan reached out and placed his conceptual hand against the surface of the obelisk. The moment his mind brushed the object, a torrential flood of hidden data rushed into his awareness. It was a terrifying revelation that completely shattered the premise of his mission. The void blight was not a naturally occurring cosmic disease. It was a highly sophisticated and artificially engineered weapon of mass psychological destruction. It was a targeted digital malware, carefully constructed to mimic a terminal illness. And the digital signature embedded deep within the root code belonged unmistakably to the high command of the Galactic Council. The political motive unraveled clearly before his inner eye. The Sovereign King believed his daughter was the bright future of the galaxy, but the Council saw her as the ultimate threat to their existence. Princess Lyra possessed a unique royal genetic marker, a biological key capable of activating the ancient and dormant slipstream gates scattered across the outer rim systems. If she ascended to the throne, she would possess the power to unite the marginalized and impoverished colonies of the galactic edge. This sudden unification would instantly break the Galactic Council's absolute monopoly on faster-than-light travel and interplanetary commerce. The elite rulers could not allow such a massive shift in the balance of power. Therefore, they secretly poisoned the princess during a routine diplomatic banquet, masterfully masking the assassination attempt as a tragic and incurable mental decay. They sought to maintain their supreme dominance by slowly murdering the only beacon of hope for the outer worlds. They did not just fail to cure you, Alan spoke, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound sorrow and rising anger. They are the ones who put you in this cage. The Council engineered this entire nightmare. Lyra manifested beside him, her starlight form flickering rapidly with shock and disbelief. The devastating revelation struck her harder than the disease itself. The supreme guardians of the galaxy were her actual executioners. Meanwhile, in the physical realm of the Royal Mausoleum, the atmosphere on the observation deck shifted abruptly from morbid curiosity to absolute panic. The elite members of the Galactic Council frantically monitored the telemetry of the mine bridge. They watched in sheer horror as the primitive human bypassed the destructive loops and directly accessed the encrypted root files of the Black Obelisk. "The human has breached the core quarantine zone," a technician shouted, his multifaceted eyes wide with terror. "He is downloading the origin protocols. He knows the truth." The chief overseer, a massive reptilian creature draped in heavy golden robes, slammed his scaled fist violently against the primary control console. "Initiate the absolute cognitive firewall," he roared. "Lock the neural pathways permanently. Incinerate his consciousness and let the princess die with him. We must leave no trace of our involvement." Back in the subconscious realm, the environment reacted instantly to the external command. The dark void above Alan and Lyra suddenly ignited. A torrential downpour of blinding and searing white digital fire descended upon them, forming a massive and impenetrable wall of burning code that completely encircled their position. It was a lethal quarantine protocol, a localized apocalypse designed to permanently delete every single memory, thought, and instinct they possessed. The physical toll on Alan's real body was immediate and devastating. In the sterile chamber, his organic form began to convulse violently against the heavy restraints of the interface chair. Deep crimson blood started to stream freely from his nose, his ears, and the corners of his eyes, heavily staining his collar. The automated medical drones shrieked, their sirens blaring as they detected massive and catastrophic neural hemorrhaging alongside widespread nerve damage. His heart rate skyrocketed to lethal levels. "Abort the connection immediately!" a medical officer screamed over the noise. "His organic brain is melting!" But Alan fiercely refused to let go. His hands gripped the armrests of the console with such terrifying force that his knuckles turned entirely white and his muscle fibers tore. He anchored himself to the physical world through pure and stubborn agony, absolutely refusing to abandon the connection. In the burning digital prison, the immense heat of the firewall pressed down upon them, threatening to crush their minds into fine dust. Lyra felt the agonizing weight of Alan's sacrifice. She saw the blood dripping from his conceptual form and the severe fractures appearing across his mental projection. This primitive creature, born from a muddy dirt world, was willingly sacrificing his own existence to protect her. A profound and overwhelming surge of gratitude and defiance ignited deep within her soul. Rejecting the rigid and solitary nature of her advanced species, Lyra reached out and tightly grabbed Alan's hand. In a monumental display of evolutionary rebellion, she completely shattered the fundamental psychic barrier that separated her high-born intellect from his earthly mind. She forcefully opened the floodgates of her soul, pouring her ancestral memories, the vast collective history of her royal bloodline, and her deepest emotions directly into his consciousness. Alan absorbed the history of 1,000 star systems, the glorious birth of nebulas, and the profound sorrow of dead empires. At the exact same moment, Lyra felt the wet mud of Earth, the sharp smell of gunpowder, and the fierce and unyielding warmth of human compassion. Their distinct identities blurred and merged seamlessly together, forging a singular and incredibly powerful unified consciousness that stood defiantly against the blinding white fire. They were backed into an inescapable corner. The blazing firewall of the Galactic Council contracted closer, its terrible heat threatening total cognitive erasure. Alan knew perfectly well they could not punch through the barrier. They could not drag Lyra's consciousness out of the abyss, while the monstrous malware firmly blocked the only viable exit, facing complete annihilation. Alan made a spectacularly reckless decision, one that relied entirely on the darkest and most profound survival mechanism of the human condition. He would not push the poison away. He would consume it entirely. Unlike the highly evolved alien species who lived in states of absolute mental clarity and interconnected harmony, humans possessed a terrifyingly effective psychological defense mechanism. Humans had the unique capacity to repress, compartmentalize, and deeply bury horrific psychological trauma. They could pack agonizing pain into tight and dark boxes within their minds and continue to function, walking wounded through their daily lives. "I am taking it all," Alan declared within their unified mindscape, his voice carrying the heavy weight of a massive stone. Lyra's thoughts flared with immediate panic. She warned him that the concentrated digital poison would instantly annihilate his fragile organic structures, reminding him that the code was specifically designed to consume 100 advanced minds at once. "It consumes logic," Alan replied with a grim and weary smile. "So I am going to feed it a nightmare." Alan completely detached his mental projection from the sanctuary of the impossible flower. He stepped forward into the blistering heat of the firewall and approached the glowing black obelisk. He actively plunged into the absolute darkest depths of his own subconscious. He bypassed the joyful memories of his childhood, the warmth of the sun on his face, and the quiet moments of peace. He dug straight down into the cold and desolate bedrock of his deepest traumas. He vividly visualized a massive and subterranean concrete bunker, its walls thick with the metallic stench of dried blood and old bitter regrets. He purposefully recalled the terrified faces of the soldiers he could not save in the muddy trenches, the deafening and bone-rattling roar of artillery shells falling like rain, the suffocating and soul-crushing weight of survivors' guilt, and the bottomless black depression that had haunted him for a decade after the war. He gathered every ounce of his pure and unfiltered psychological agony, every sleepless night, every silent scream, and forged it into a mental labyrinth of absolute despair. He built a psychological prison with walls made of raw grief and floors paved with inescapable sorrow. Then, he reached out and forcefully grabbed the raw and malicious code of the Void Blight with his bare conceptual hands. The alien code shrieked, producing a terrible sound of grinding metal and tearing flesh, as Alan violently uprooted it from the center of Lyra's mind. He anchored his feet heavily to the psychic floor, and, with a massive roar of pure human defiance, dragged the writhing entity of digital poison directly into his own mind. He threw the screaming malware straight down into the concrete bunker of his trauma. The highly advanced alien weapon, mathematically designed to dismantle logical structures and consume perfect order, suddenly found itself drowning in a vast ocean of human repression. It was instantly bombarded by chaotic emotions, unresolved grief, and irrational survivor's guilt. The code frantically tried to calculate a logical way out, but there was no mathematical solution to human suffering. The sheer density of the psychological darkness completely paralyzed the program. It was helplessly trapped in a maze of broken memories, utterly incapable of processing the heavy and chaotic burden of a mortal soul before the malware could attempt to adapt. Alan quickly stepped out of the bunker and slammed the heavy rusted iron door shut. He locked it tightly with a massive titanium deadbolt forged from pure willpower, permanently burying the Galactic Council's ultimate weapon beneath a heavy mountain of silent trauma. The sudden and violent transfer of such an immense volume of corrupted data created an unprecedented psychic vacuum within the connection tether. The instantaneous removal of the blight caused a catastrophic feedback loop. The massive surge of displaced energy violently rebounded, shooting like a bright lightning bolt straight back up the neural bridge and directly into the Galactic Council's external monitoring equipment. In the observation deck high above the mausoleum, the disaster struck without warning. The master control consoles violently exploded in a massive shower of blinding blue sparks and burning shrapnel. Holographic monitors shattered into millions of sharp pieces, raining glass down upon the terrified alien dignitaries. The heavy obsidian floor cracked loudly under the sudden release of immense psychic pressure. The firewall completely collapsed, its source code violently severed by the explosive feedback, leaving a clear and unobstructed path back to the waking world. Sensing the complete collapse of the artificial barriers, Alan immediately grabbed Lyra's consciousness. With one final and monumental exertion of his remaining willpower, he hurled them both rapidly upward. They ascended quickly through the dark waters of the subconscious, breaking forcefully through the surface of the psychic ocean and racing toward the warm light of reality. In the real world, Alan's physical eyes snapped open. He gasped desperately for air, his lungs burning fiercely as if he had been submerged underwater for hours. He coughed violently, slumping forward heavily in the interface chair. He was utterly drained, his muscles trembling uncontrollably, and his simple charcoal uniform soaked completely in a mixture of cold sweat and his own dark blood. Every single nerve in his body screamed in agonizing pain, but he was breathing. He had successfully walked through the valley of the shadow of death and dragged them both out by the absolute slimmest margin of survival. And from the center of the quiet room, a beautiful sound broke the heavy silence. The medical monitors attached to the princess's stasis pod, which had displayed only chaotic and fading static for months, suddenly began to chime with a strong, steady, and perfectly healthy rhythm. The heavy hissing of depressurization echoed through the shattered remnants of the royal mausoleum as the thick, transparent casing of the stasis pod slowly retracted. From the cold vapor, Princess Lyra stepped forward. She did not stumble. She did not look like a patient recovering from a terminal illness. Instead, she radiated a blinding, majestic aura, her royal presence completely restored and amplified by the ancestral awakening she had just experienced. Her eyes, once clouded by the chaotic storm, now shone with absolute, piercing clarity. The sovereign king fell to his knees on the cracked obsidian floor, his formidable composure entirely broken as heavy tears of profound joy streamed down his weathered face. He reached out his trembling hands toward his fully healed daughter. However, up on the ruined observation deck, the reaction was vastly different. The elite representatives of the Galactic Council recoiled in sheer, unadulterated terror. The impossible had happened. The weapon they considered infallible had been defeated by a creature from the dirt. Panic instantly seized the chief overseer. His grand reptilian features twisted into a mask of desperate malice. Realizing their flawless assassination plot had just been completely derailed, he scrambled to eliminate the only witness who possessed the truth. "Treason!" the overseer bellowed, his voice amplified across the chaotic chamber. "This primitive beast has used forbidden dark technology to manipulate the royal mind. He is a saboteur. Royal guards, execute the human immediately. Do not let him speak a single word of his dark sorcery." Dozens of heavily armored guards raised their plasma rifles, locking their targeting lasers directly onto Alan's exhausted chest. Alan slowly raised his head. He looked completely battered, his unadorned uniform stained with dark blood. But there was not a single trace of fear in his eyes. He casually raised a bruised hand and wiped the fresh blood from his chin. Then, to the absolute bewilderment of the entire assembly, he smiled. It was a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly confident smile. "I strongly advise against pulling those triggers," Alan said, his voice surprisingly steady and carrying a chilling authority that brought the armed guards to an abrupt halt. "You see, Overseer, I did not destroy your little malware. You designed it to be mathematically indestructible, and you were right. I could not kill it. So, I did what humans do best. I locked it away in the darkest, deepest basement of my mind, alongside every single piece of encrypted data and root code that proves the Council engineered this assassination attempt." The chief overseer gasped, his golden robes trembling. Alan pushed himself up from the interface chair, standing tall despite his severe injuries. When you cowards panicked and fired that massive cognitive firewall at us, you made a fatal miscalculation, Alan continued, his voice echoing loudly against the stone walls. Your attack forcefully bridged my organic nervous system directly into the Council's primary digital network. Right now, my primitive, squishy human brain is securely synced with your entire central mainframe. I am currently holding your ultimate weapon and all of your darkest secrets behind a single, fragile, biological door. I have essentially turned myself into a massive psychological bomb. Alan tapped his chest, right over his heart. My vital signs are the only thing keeping that door shut. If my heart stops beating, if a single plasma bolt hits me, my subconscious will automatically fail open. It will release the entire raw, concentrated mass of the void blight directly back through your network. It will completely devour your global banking systems, your military defense grids, and every single digital archive you possess in exactly 1 millisecond. If I die, your entire 1,000-year empire burns to ashes before my body even hits the floor. A deafening, horrified silence fell over the galactic elites. They were completely checkmated. The supreme rulers of the universe were now entirely hostage to the heartbeat of a single, battered human. Suddenly, a deep, booming sound shattered the tension. It was the Sovereign King. He was laughing. It started as a low rumble and erupted into a roaring, triumphant laugh that shook the very foundations of the mausoleum. He looked at the trembling council members, finally realizing the full extent of their treacherous betrayal, and then looked at the brilliant, muddy human who had just conquered them all. "Guards, lower your weapons instantly," the king commanded with absolute authority. He walked over to Alan and placed a heavy, grateful hand on his shoulder. "The council has been exposed, and their reign of shadows ends today. Let the entire galaxy hear my decree. The trial is complete, and the impossible has been achieved. Let the grand wedding officially begin. From this day forward, the Earth species shall rise and stand at the very pinnacle of our empire." Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-Fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen. Or click the link in the description box or the pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.